Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Institute for Personal Development, where total consciousness is the new frontier. Kriya Yoga is the union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices that initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's Talk Consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Well, good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm well. And how about you?
I'm doing well, too. Thank you. Well, I'd like to thank the listeners for tuning in. And today on the Voice of Yoga, we will be discussing the origins of the religious holidays and the real meaning of the feast. We will also talk about the differences between worldly happiness, intellectual happiness, and eternal happiness, and how it all depends on what we desire. So in our description, Swami, you have a quote in there and it says, the more things change, the more they remain the same. Can you give us an idea as to what do you mean by that quote, and why did you put it in the description?
Yeah, that is a good question. The more things change, the more they remain the same. I like to use that expression because of the whole thing of how things are in constant change. But that underlying all of this change, in our reality, there is a constant. And this concept of God, or this concept of the void or the unchanging or the permanent, is what I think most of the texts are referring to as the concept of truth. And so the more things change, the more they remain the same. It just seems like everything is very cyclical. And underlying every change, there is this unchanging kind of ambiance. And a lot of what we are trying to do in Kriya Yoga is literally attune ourselves to that dimension of reality, that unchanging part of reality that is oftentimes referred to as eternity. That, there is this realm, there is this dimension of reality where everything is happening at once, where we transcend time and space, where there really isn't any becoming or, being born or dying, that everything is just in complete harmony, complete balance, it's whole. Does that help at all, or?
Yeah, I think so. If somebody is trying to make these changes to become whole, as we've talked about in the last programs, and then you're saying the more things change, the more they remain the same. So how are we supposed to still continue to try to change our bodies and change how we think and do all these other things, through the practice of Kriya Yoga that you teach? Because we don't want things to remain the same. We want to change, ourselves so we can become whole.
Yeah, that's the whole thing that we call in yoga. First, you must divide and conquer before you can unite and stand. That the whole thing is that first we have to separate and get this broader perspective of things. That, the problem with our original condition is that we are embroiled in the changing part. And so a big part of the practice of yoga, and also all of our religions in their original format, were lifestyle strategies. They were game plans for being able to separate from this very unreliable source of sustenance, the parts of reality that are in constant change, and then reconnect to this permanent source of sustenance And so one of the things that that we learn in Kriya Yoga is how to literally become dependent upon the part of reality that isn't in constant change. And the benefit that comes with that is that it doesn't negate what's happening in the physical world. It just makes it a little bit smaller, which doesn't negate it, but it makes it way more manageable. You're able to keep things in perspective. And your whole sense of self and your whole sense of well-being is totally dependent upon, this stream of energy that is more reliable and more dependable. It's unchanging. It's permanent.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good answer. I think that kind of clarifies my what I was questioning. So let's get back to the other description that we had put about our show today. Let's talk about the feast. And I know you want to talk a little bit about religion, too. So let's explain to our listeners what does religion really mean and what is the feast?
Well, for me, like I say, religion, the term itself means to relink. So religion to me was instruction to do something. And I think the way that our religions today have presented themselves, that they've deteriorated into belief systems as opposed to instruction to do something. And, when it misses the mark, when it is off point, when it isn't designed to do what it was intended to do, which was literally to help us separate from our attachment to the changing parts of reality and realign or join with the unchanging part of reality. And so to me, that was the big distinction that I make between, what I think religions are doing today as opposed to what they were intended to do. And again, that's why yoga means union or to yoke. Again, you're trying to separate from this impermanent and connect to something that is more reliable and more dependable, the permanent source of sustenance. And of course now the whole concept of the feast, that the way most of our religions have presented themselves is that it seemed to me anyway, my exposure to them, that it was always about abstaining, you gave up all of the things that you were typically using to reward yourself or validate yourself with from the tangible world. And everything was in hopes of some sort of reward for your conduct, for your efforts, and that you were going to be either rewarded or punished based on how well you were doing. And that isn't how it works at all. That it is not about conduct at all, and it's not about abstaining at all. But it's actually about separating from one source of sustenance and converting the human mind-body complex to now desire this more reliable resource of energy, so that it is not sensual deprivation, but in fact it becomes indulgence. That once you now separate from a human being that is, thriving on particles and waves, you now convert this mind-body complex to a human being that is now thriving on the life force. And when you do that, if you really cross-examine it and you think about it, look at what you just did for yourself. Because if every time you took a breath, it reinforced a feeling in your body that you were happy, that you were special, that you were good enough. Now, whether you were breathing consciously or you were breathing unconsciously, you continue to reinforce this feeling in your body that you were special. You know, that's very different than assigning that same feeling to something that is either unavailable or something that is expensive and rare. You know, because that's what you start to see is that life is a simple mind game. It's going to be the association between a symbol and a feeling. And it's all kind of come down to, you know, just like what we're talking about here, this whole concept of happiness. You know, like, what is happiness? And, of course, then what does it look like when I'm happy? And then, you know, how can I make myself happy all the time?
I want to ask you a question. You kind of triggered a question in my mind through your description. We were talking about feasting, you know, so I was thinking about how we just did a show on Thanksgiving and the Thanksgiving feast, and now coming up, people will be, you know, embroiled in the Christmas feast, and then people feast for Easter. So it almost seems like we have feasting always geared around these religious holidays. You know, even in, you know, the story of Scrooge at the very end, he, you know, buys the biggest goose in the window so that, you know, he can give it to that family so they can feast on Christmas Day. So what do you think it is that we as people are, you know, what do you think that is that we're doing when we are feasting? You know, what do you think is the underlying purpose behind that?
Well, again, we're associating the symbol of food with the image that is associated with the symbol of happiness. And the intention of a religious holiday wasn't necessarily to be revolve around the food. It was intended to revolve around the life force. And so because we don't separate from our attachment to the tangible world, you know, we're preoccupied with the food thing. And then, of course, we've associated the symbol of the food with the feeling that we're happy. And the problem with that is that there's nothing intrinsically evil with it. But now our bodies will long for food instead of this grace of God, instead of this tree of life. And again, there's nothing wrong with it, other than the fact that how much food can you eat? Because the driving force behind the feeling that I want to be happy comes from preservation and survival. See, it becomes an insatiable craving. And our bodies live in fear. The body is going to die, and it knows it's going to die, and it lives in chronic anxiety. The problem with the physical body is that it has all the power of preservation and survival, but it's blind. It has no vision and no power of discernment. So we can internalize any image in our bodies to use to produce the feeling that we're okay. Now that becomes what I would consider to be the origins of the word happiness. In yoga, we use the term santosha, contentment. You know, when the body has what it thinks it needs to produce the feeling it's okay, it produces this sense of calmness and stillness in the body. Now, the whole intention of religion was to educate human beings in how to separate from our dependency upon things that are tangible and reconnect to something that was invisible and intangible. But it wasn't something that you believe in. It's something that you actually do. And when you rebirth your body in the life force, now it's not a question of giving up all the things that you're using now to produce the feeling you're happy. It's a substitution. that's why yoga really appealed to me, because they were still using the body. Because if you don't change the reward circuits in your brain, if you don't change your neurological pathways, then the change just doesn't go deep enough. Then, of course, you're going to long for something tangible, and you're not using what you need as the symbol to produce the feeling in the body that you're happy. But that's where I think the breakdown has happened, is that we really don't make that clear distinction. So everything revolves around the food and the association with the feeling being happy. And then, of course, in varying degrees of what I would call dysfunction, because a lot of it's going to depend on, the foods that we do eat. Because most of the foods that people are craving do produce cravings for themselves. The sugars, the salts, those are all foods that produce cravings. We become addicted to them. That's one of the reasons why in yoga you have to purify your body. You have to prepare it for the invocation of this life force, but not abstaining. But it's a conversion. Now all of a sudden you use breath as a symbol that produces the same feeling that you're happy. Only now you can indulge yourself in breath, and you don't have to worry about, increasing your waistline or, any of the other, I want to say, symptoms that can happen as a result of, overeating.
All right, we're going to pause right there, if you don't mind, and listeners, we will be back with you shortly.
Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnamudachyate.
If you are looking for a samadhi-based experience, IPD Kriya Yoga has the goods. A complete yoga program that includes the practices and the process. Kriya Yoga Theory 1 live classes and videos. Get your arms around the spiritual science of Kriya Yoga.
The intention of why we practice is to embody spirit, to feel connected to the life force.
Kriya Yoga Asana live classes and videos. A cosmically engineered system of exercises to initiate apotheosis. A system of exercises engineered for dining and dancing at the Cosmic Ballroom. Kriya Yoga Theory 2 live classes and videos. A practice in open form designed to facilitate positive growth of consciousness. Get your Labyrinth video.
I find the positive side of this is it pulls a lot of things together.
Kriya Yoga Mantra and Meditation. With repetition comes absorption. Pray on prana and become divine.
At the same time, we all have a unique talent and gift to give back to the universe.
Private session. The mysteries of the universe have always been handed down verbally from teacher to student. Call or click now and get started. 603-929-0303 or www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste.
Purnamariya Purnameva Vashishate.
Well, welcome back. For those of you just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. So, Swami, before we took that break, you had mentioned the word purification. And for those of our listeners who don't know what purification means or how it even begins or starts, could you school us on what are the first steps of purification? How should somebody get started with that?
Well, one of the things I always say is offense is your best defense. That I really think that when you start a yoga practice that you really want to build from a position of strength, and that's why we begin our program with skillful use of thought. That starting to think right, knowing the difference between a need and a want is of the utmost importance. And then, of course, learning the importance of your needs based on how long you can live without them. And then by employing skillful use of thought and thinking right, now you're developing your value system. Then you can start by correcting any bad habits you may have from there, making sure that you're breathing right, getting maximum volume of oxygen, keeping yourself hydrated, drinking enough water. And then from there, you could actually start to eliminate some of the foods that you're eating that are producing cravings and disturbances. Because the whole thing of trying to understand the word happiness, to understand happiness, you just look at an infant child at its mother's bosom, and there really isn't anything that you could do to persuade that child to leave that bosom. You could have a wheelbarrow full of money, you could have a keg of beer, you could have a box of chocolate. That child is content with what it has. And so the human in the adult state is trying to wean themselves off of that bosom, but now reconnect to something that is now equally more valuable. And so one of the things that we always say is your body is like a monkey, and a monkey won't let go of one branch unless it has another branch in the other hand. So by getting this other branch in your other hand, and maybe even creating your own commercials is something that we also talk about. Think about, because we begin all of our sessions with a rhetorical question. What's going to matter if my next breath isn't there? Because if your next breath isn't there, you're only going to have a couple of minutes to live. The real question is how did all of this other stuff become so important to me? And the real answer to that question is we're not thinking right. We're not reveling in the availability of what's really important to us. And we're preoccupied with these lesser images that we have assigned to this feeling that we're okay. So when you start to purify yourself, you really want to have, I want to say a complete game plan in place before you start just giving up, caffeine, nicotine, alcohol, refined sugars, because most people that when you start to give up those things, you're going to find that you're taking away symbols that your body's using to produce the feeling it's okay. And then, of course, you'll get depressed. But if you can get this other branch in your other hand, then when you do start to give up, the transition will be relatively seamless.
And these are the type of issues that we discuss on our Theory 2 classes, if anybody's ever interested in that, and that is how do we take yoga off the mat and employ it into our everyday life, and in the struggles that we may have with the steps of not just purification, but all the other things. How do we exist in this daily world? So speaking of that, we talked about the different types of happiness. How does one know if they are internally happy?
Well, you have this consistency, I want to say, that again, the more things change, the more they remain the same. Like if you kind of feel like you're on this roller coaster, that, you're up one day, you're down the next, or you're up for 2 months, you're down for 2 months, whatever cycle you might be on, that it's all going to come down to, the simple association between your peak experience feeling, what you have as, the feeling that you're okay, that you're happy, that you're good enough. And then whatever it is that you have assigned that feeling to. That if it is assigned to particles, you will experience what I call worldly happiness. If you have assigned that same feeling to waves, thoughts, you will experience intellectual happiness. But if you have assigned that feeling to this indivisible unified field, the void, the life force, this tree of life, the grace of God, then you will experience what's called eternal happiness. And it will be unchanging. It will be constant. And in fact, something magical happens with the connection to the void that doesn't happen with the connection to particles or waves. And the thing that happens is that the connection to the life force produces a progressive cycle. The feeling initially, which was just contentment, will now start to evolve. It will start to grow in the same way that your conscious mind will start to expand. That same feeling will start to evolve into bliss, wonder, and awe. And that's the one thing that you won't get from worldly happiness or intellectual happiness. So there is in my opinion, there is a relatively big distinction between the two.
When you talk about intellectual happiness, the author C.S. Lewis comes to mind, as well as Ralph Waldo Emerson and all the other greats. Do you think that they experience intellectual happiness, or obviously you don't know because you're not them, but just from an outsider looking in, and I know you've read a lot of their works, do you consider them to be, or to have been intellectual happy or eternally happy?
Well, to answer your question, again, like you said, I don't know. I didn't know them. Ralph Waldo Emerson, to me, I think was probably closer to the fact because he did live the same lifestyle. The American transcendentalists, they were the ones that, drank water out of a wooden cup, and didn't want to dash the hopes of a day with a dish of tea, because I think they really were onto it. Now, C.S. Lewis, from my understanding, he drank, alcohol, he smoked cigarettes. Didn't really have the same lifestyle. So again, was one understanding eternal happiness or one was intellectual happiness? Those are questions I don't know. But from my understanding of eternal happiness is that you must purify your body. That you can't get this source of sustenance into it. Your body will not have attention for something that's invisible and intangible if it resonates to the frequency of something that's visible and tangible or invisible and tangible.
Great answer. Well, I think we need to maybe start thinking about closing down our program. So I'd like to invite the listeners out there to please visit our website. You can follow Swami on Pinterest and Twitter, of course, Facebook. Also, we have available the online classes through Powwow. So just click on the link for online classes, and that will direct you to Powwow from there, and you can make your choice. But keep those comments and questions and curiosities coming, so Swami does enjoy hearing from you. So I want you to stay tuned to our program for next week when we'll be talking about the holiday stress. Is it imagined or real? Any final thoughts today, Swami?
Well, I would like to invite everybody that we are starting a new Theory 1 class at 10:30 this morning. If you're interested, you could check the website at www.ipdtransform.com and click on online classes and sign up. We'll be talking about Yama, control, and again, invite people to the spiritual advance to join us. That this week we'll be on week 25 of the spiritual advance. And with that, I'll wish everybody a good day and namaste, and I'll give it back to you.
And thank you so much for being here today. Also, one quick point, don't forget our spiritual retreat coming up in Costa Rica, end of February. You can visit our website to get more information on that. In the meantime, thank you for listening to our program, The Voice of Yoga. I am Lisa Winton, along with Swami Jayananda, signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga kind of day. Namaste.